Hello and welcome to this panel discussion. I'm Alok, the science correspondent for The Economist. And in this panel, we're going to be discussing the question, will the hardware winner take it all, or is there scope for all to succeed? So how many hardware providers will ultimately drop out of the race? What are the pros and cons of things like trapped ions, of photonics, cold atoms, and superconducting for all the different applications? And is there scope for everyone to succeed? I've got an expert panel here. Let me introduce them for you. I've got Sir Peter Knight, who's the Emeritus Professor and Researcher in Physics at Imperial College London. Dr. Celia Merzbacher, Executive Director of Quantum Economic Development Consortium. Dr. Carmen Palacios Berraquero, Founder and Chief Executive of New Quantum Ltd. And Dr. Oliver Dial, IBM Fellow and Chief Quantum Hardware Architect at IBM Quantum. Now, this panel is only half an hour, and we've got a lot to cover. So I thought it'd be good to start this session, perhaps with Sir Peter. Maybe you can give us a bit of an overview of the pros and cons of the questions that I raised at the beginning, the pros and cons of things like trapped ions and photonics and cold atoms. What are the different applications, and is there really scope for all of them to be successful in the quantum future?
Well, we have a number of options that we're looking at the moment in terms of quantum computing. And not all of them satisfy all the requirements that we might want to have. Some of them are fast, but are quite hard to scale and could be noisy. Some of them are really quiet, but are really slow, and so on. So at this stage, if you look at all of these various platforms, they've got various merits. At this point, it's really very, very hard for us to work out how to scale down and say, this is the winner, we'll go for that one. They've all got merits at the moment. Not all of them satisfy all the criteria that we want. So I can see that over the next 3 years, trapped ions will still provide a vehicle by which we can look at ways in which we address things, read out the message with great fidelity. Superconducting is really fast. It's already established quite substantial platforms. But of course, then there's a scaling issue, there's a refrigeration issue, and so on. Cold atoms look like they're really going to be useful for quantum simulation. And in all of these platforms, there are intermediate goals where we can see practical applications in terms of simulation, optimization, and so on. So in this noisy intermediate region we're in at the moment, there are actually already commercial applications which I believe will actually show the merit of these platforms. Down selecting for a large-scale fault-tolerant machine is a longer journey where we need to give all of these a chance to demonstrate what they can do and how they can scale.
Celia, can I ask you, do you think that different technologies will end up being used for different applications? Clearly, that's a possibility. Does it mean that there could be a sort of a diversity of technologies around in a decade or so?
Well, thank you. I think the short answer is it's too early to tell. It's very difficult to know which technologies are going to win the day. But it's possible, certainly, that one technology might have advantages that prove to be most useful in certain applications. To some extent, that's even true in digital computing. There are systems that are made using technologies other than silicon-based technologies, although silicon is predominant. So we could imagine that there might be some diversity. And there's even the possibility that you might have hybrid systems where there are sort of quantum processor units or QPUs using different technologies that would bring different advantages. That poses a lot of additional questions, but some people think of quantum processors like accelerators, like you have systems with CPUs and GPUs. And so that's another possible outcome.
And Carmen, tell me a little bit about how your company is trying to tackle some of these issues around trying to work out which of the technologies might be most useful and to take advantage of the pros and minimize the cons.
Yeah, so there are several parameters, obviously, as Sir Peter has outlined, the several pros and cons of each technology. the error prone. Some technologies are more error prone. Some technologies have different physical barriers to scale, etc. What we are doing is creating quantum networking technology, photonic networking, that might eventually help interconnect different, smaller, more efficient modules together. And so tackling the physical scaling limitations of most technologies. But here, the hardware types that are kind of better integrated with photonic networking are, for example, ions or atoms, whereas superconducting or spins have some more difficulties in integrated with a photonic network. And so this might play a role as well.
So everything has its own barriers, and I suppose there's a bit of a Wild West going on to try and work out which one is going to be win in the end. But Oliver, let me ask you, from the point of view of a big company with a history of computing like IBM, do you try and go for everything, or do you focus on certain particular technologies that make sure that you might be the company that it happens to be having the right technology at the right time?
Well, let me start by saying I think the Wild West is an incredibly helpful scenario to be in. That in each one of these systems, there are some problems that are quite subtle and hard to tackle, and some that are really easy to see and easy to work on. And so having a variety of practitioners in the field, all of whom are working on their individual systems and sharing what they learn from trying to do this research is just incredibly helpful to the community. And in fact, from a hiring prospect, we try to have a team of diverse researchers that have worked on a variety of different systems to bring those different expertises together. But as a company, of course, we have to choose a path and focus on it. And so we make our best bet. In the case of IBM, our biggest bet right now is on superconducting qubits. And we try to push as far as we can, as quickly as we can with that and see where it takes us. While keeping in mind, in the back of our heads, there may come the day that it's time to switch horses. So, we try to push very, very deeply in one area while keeping our eye on the breadth of technologies available.
Yeah, I mean, the journey to fault tolerance is going to be a long one, as we've sort of indicated, and there's going to be all sorts of technologies that come and go. How important is patience when it comes to these technologies? We hear a lot about how quantum technologies are going to completely revolutionize computing, and perhaps people think that's going to happen tomorrow, which it won't do. Peter, I wonder if you could talk about the need for patience and perhaps some support from public institutions as well, rather than just companies like Oliver's.
Patience is going to be necessary for fault-tolerant machines because we're probably a decade away at least, and there are many, many challenges that have to be overcome. People have routes towards that goal. People know really how they might want to get there, but it's still going to be a long engineering journey. So if you're a company with very deep pockets, maybe that's something you'll want to do because this is going to be transformative. But if you're not from a company with deep pockets, then what one needs is an investor portfolio, which is patient. But in addition, have the ability to identify what can be of value on that route when you get prototype machines that could be a little bit noisy, they're not correcting errors, but nevertheless have an application. So one wants to make sure that the companies survive, that have an eye on markets that are relatively immediate, but have the ability to raise resource over a decade to deliver this big vision. Because once we get to a fault-tolerant machine, then it really is open to huge numbers of applications. But en route to that, there's still going to be things to do. So patient capital, and that may well require government intervention, simply because in order to de-risk that invention and that kind of investment, governments can play a role in procurement, for example. Buy something means a company will have something on the order book and it will deliver. Buy something that's already useful.
Governments, of course, have a long role in funding basic research when it comes to basic quantum technologies or trying to de-risk the route to market. And I wonder, Celia, if you could talk a bit more about whether quantum technologies have, whether there are any specific types of support that governments can be doing for this de-risking, to allow companies to be a bit more patient, to allow investors to sort of see the long term rather than cashing out quickly when nothing's quite working.
Well, I think the answer is yes, and there are a number of tools that governments can use without necessarily picking winners, which they don't like to do, especially at an early stage like where we are now. So there are sort of everything from tax policies that incentivize companies to invest more to, as Peter said, being an early adopter and creating some early markets. I think that's a very important role. And the question is, what makes sense for governments today, and when will quantum computers offer them something that can serve a government function, whether it's something like managing transportation or the electric grid or some kind of government function really that can be applied. So I think that government also can make investments in sort of early stage companies. In the US, there are programs aimed at very small businesses to support research in those small companies. And I think that's very important because, frankly, while IBM has the resources and a great track record, small companies are often where innovation and new ideas emerge. They may get acquired, they may grow to become a large company, but you really want a healthy and robust small company sort of regime, and companies like Carmen's are going to be critical to making progress.
Well, that's a neat way to introduce Carmen in that case. Carmen, I wonder if I could ask you, how can companies like yours be supported and encouraged? Is it access to capital that you need? Is it more access to talent, collaborations with academia? Tell me what would make lots of companies like yours flourish.
So I think access to capital and access to talent are obvious ones, and it's getting pretty hard to recruit in the quantum industry. But I think what we're all really trying to achieve in the long term, and what will actually keep this industry going and make it flourish, will be finding that killer product market fit. And so I think a way that governments can help the industry is by incentivizing end users to collaborate on medium to long-term projects with companies, so that we can really find that commercial application that is going to, wow the industry and generate real revenues.
I wonder if one of you might be able to answer a more basic question. I mean, a lot of quantum technologies are sort of slightly mystical to people outside the field, and the way we hear about them is that they're going to solve problems that normal computers can't, or faster, or something like that. And I wonder if you might be able to give me some concrete examples of when there are less noisy quantum computing systems around, what kinds of things a government or a company or me as a consumer might see as a benefit from that. Peter, maybe you could start.
If you look at some of the applications of even a medium scale machine, there are already applications that people are looking at where companies that have developed things of the order of 100 qubits under control, as IBM have done, already can show a customer that's interested in optimization, for example, of simulation, of things like logistics. These are all customers that would benefit from access even to a medium-sized machine that's available. And of course, the progress in terms of increasing the number of bits is phenomenal. Let me remind people about how it works. If I have 100 qubits that are reasonably well controlled, and I add another one, I double the size of the machine. Once you realize that, you can see that there's a tremendous acceleration of computational power. That doubling for every qubit means that this race upwards in terms of capability is with us now. Not very long ago, we were really marveling at what happened when we had 50 qubits. We're already at 100 qubits in a number of machines. And people are eagerly getting access to this via various cloud mechanisms so that they can really kick the tires and work out what it actually does for them as customers. So it's not distant, it's now.
Oliver, I wonder if you might be able to add something there. I mean, I don't know if this is your job within IBM. I'm sure that there are others who do this too, but how do you talk to people outside the quantum sort of expertise realm, as it were, about the kinds of things and the kinds of advances that are happening to try to persuade them to keep interested?
Well, the first and foremost thing we try to do is put our machines into the hands of users. That we want the people that might someday benefit from having quantum computers to be able to try them out now and to be able to explore for themselves the problems in their domain that might be approachable using quantum computation. And to that end, Sir Peter alluded to this, we have a number of machines available through the cloud that you can use with varying qubit counts going all the way from 1 to about 100. Some of those are available for free to the public to explore. Some of those are available to our partners and to our hubs. But creating a cycle where we have rapid feedback between people that want to use quantum computers, our clients, and people that want to build quantum computers ourselves, so that we can find the common ground and we can begin to close the gap between the algorithms that people that want to run and the algorithms that our hardware can run, is just incredibly important to making rapid progress in this field. And it's kind of the cornerstone of our approach of rapidly innovating on ideas and trying to behave like a startup, even though we are a large company.
Yeah. Celia, I wonder if I could talk to you about your role and your organization's role a little bit more. So there's lots of competition that's going to happen in the next decades between different companies, and that's good. Innovation is best when there's lots of competition. But are there shared problems that organizations like yours, QED-C, can help to address across the sector so that everyone is sort of moving forward with common standards or whatever else is necessary to make the industry actually function rather than sort of hobble itself?
Well, yes, there is so many areas where there are common needs. An organization like ours is not necessarily trying to decide which of the technologies will succeed or to support one over the other, but to ask the question, what are the enabling technologies that are sort of all around the qubit and need to also be advanced in order for the field to move forward faster and to reach the application, the potential, and the markets ultimately. And so technologies like cryogenic technologies, specific types of lasers, vacuum systems, electronics that meet the requirements of quantum systems. Today, many of the people who are doing the R&D, whether in academia or in companies, have to either make their own or can buy things that weren't designed for the purposes that they're being put to. And so there's really a supply chain that needs to develop. And so a consortium can help to identify and communicate what the system developers really need and start developing that supply chain that serves all of the technologies at this point in time when they're in competition. So I think that's a very important one. Other areas which are perhaps you would say non-competitive are ones like standards discussions and developing benchmarks that make sense. We have here on this panel people who are really focusing on the hardware level, and that's critical. There's also software. You need to have agreed ways of compiling systems and running them on different platforms today. So there are a lot of areas where companies and technologies need to come together to develop things jointly. And the final thing I'll put in a shout out for, which Carmen mentioned, is the talent pool and developing workers. Some people would say that we have more of a bottleneck in the talent supply than in the technology and idea supply.
Carmen, can I pick up on that a little bit? You mentioned talent, and so Celia. What is the issue when it comes to recruiting people? Is it just that there aren't enough people who've done PhDs in quantum physics to hire, or is there something else? Peter, I'll come to you. I see you shaking your head. I'll come to you in a second.
I think it's at this point in time, companies want people that have, yes, done PhDs in quantum, but perhaps also have a more some engineering experience, some industry experience, have a kind of engineering approach, have experience with managing teams. So as companies grow and organizations grow, we need a variety of people that are quantum aware, but also aware of everything that makes an organization actually work in a healthy way. It's very competitive at the moment. Talent moves from company to company and between institutions. And I think, this is just the moment where the industry is at. But governments are making a huge impact in advancing the talent pool for everyone.
Peter, can I come to you as someone who has for a long time overseen the pipeline of new talent going into this world? How do you sort of assess that pipeline? Is it good? Do we need more of it? Is there any blockages?
In my view, we need quite a lot more, because companies are going to require a range of skills. What we're trying to do, by the way, is to generate a new kind of profession, quantum engineers. So we need to take quantum physicists to make them engineering competent, engineers to make them quantum aware. It's not just a matter of PhDs, as Carmen obviously has highlighted that. That's an essential part of it. But where do we get the technicians from? A whole raft of things that we need to be able to generate on this one. So you need a spectrum of activities, and we need to work out ways in which we do a skill enhancement to actually increase that pipeline. Because if we don't, we end up with a kind of quantum cannibalism where companies just are grabbing talent from their competitors. And we need to do better than that. And so everybody around the world is working on this skill business. Celia and I have been discussing this at some length of how the UK and the US can collaborate more in terms of getting over to all sorts of people who are providers of the skill pipeline the tremendous opportunities there are for working in this new area. But remember, technicians, engineers, physicists, software experts, they're all essential. And we are trying to build a new breed of people, quantum engineers.
Oliver, I wonder, at a company like IBM, do you find that you get the talent you need, or do you also have issues around certain skills? And just a supplementary, I suppose, you could be these types of organizations that I guess pull through from academia and connect with academia in that way to sort of show that all these new jobs exist. I wonder if you could give us the point of view of skills from the point of view of a large company.
Well, at the risk of agreeing with the other panelists, we don't just need quantum physicists. That the qubits are a very, very small piece in the middle of an incredibly complicated system. That we need engineers, we need general scientists, material scientists, what I would call process integrators, programmers, the full stack. But I also think we have an incredible opportunity in that quantum computing is a really exciting technology that you don't really have to sit down and explain to somebody quantum advantage of quantum chemistry to get them excited about the idea that we'll have quantum computers in your lifetime. Just go try talking to your kids about this and see what they say. And so we have an opportunity to pull people into sciences, into the technical fields, with just the glamour around what we're doing. And I think that that's something that we can use to our advantage to help everyone, to help the countries that we live in, to help our society. And so it's an advantage that we should shamelessly take advantage of right now while we have it.
Can I change the topic slightly to another use of quantum computing and quantum technologies, which gets a lot of press, and I wonder if you could give us a bit of a reality check on it, but also, give us a sense of, what it means for the industry. So national security, people talk about quantum computing being incredibly useful for national security reasons, and it probably will be in many respects, useful for military things, all of that. I wonder how realistic, how important that will be for this technology. And also, how do you think that it might impact on things like innovation, or if you're restricting who can collaborate with whom, or what things you can export? I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. Celia, I wonder if I could start with you.
Well, I think that it's been recognized for a long time, the potential implications, or not even potential, but the real implications for national security and breaking encryption, for instance. There's work going on that is working toward coming up with quantum resistant cryptography standards. And so the ability to manage that risk, I think, is being developed. We've improved cryptography standards over and over, and will continue to do so. But because encryption is so important for business and for government functions and so on, it's important that the users of systems be aware. This is, let me just make clear, a threat to our digital systems. And eventually, quantum may provide more secure techniques for moving information and so on. But what we need today are new ways of protecting our existing infrastructure from the attacks that are enabled by quantum computers. The quantum computers will have to be quite powerful, and they're a ways off. So we have time to prepare for when that's possible. But at the same time, I think there's recognition that innovation in this field is happening all around the world. And so building walls around one country is not going to provide protection. And really, there needs to be cooperation at the international level to make sure that the entire global systems are protected.
Oliver, do you agree? I mean, IBM obviously works all around the world, and would hope to sell its products and work with people all over the world. I mean, how important is this a risk to innovation and moving forward?
Well, to follow up a little bit on what Celia said, there are applications that we think will be of enormous commercial relevance, well short of the cryptographically relevant systems. And so this is really not a time to be putting on the brakes and being afraid. This is a chance for us to leap ahead. And if you imagine a context where you might try to hold things tight, to keep them secret, to not share them as a way of protecting yourself, that's really not going to work, because, as Celia said, there are people researching this all around the world. That if we want to remain leaders in this technology, the key is to be open and to move faster. This is not something we can keep in a bottle in one place.
We're coming up to the end of our session, and I just thought it'd be good to get some final thoughts from you all. And I'll throw in a question, but feel free to sort of go beyond this for your final thoughts. Given the sort of the excitement around quantum computing, there's a risk that perhaps some people might think it's being overhyped, and that there's going to be probably some disenchantment and some concern about the technologies unless quantum technology delivers applications of substance soon. And I wonder if you have thoughts on that, and are there any other things you'd like to perhaps end with? Peter, can I start with you?
We've all tried really hard to make sure that we avoid hype in this sort of area. I used to very much listen to a guru of this field, Rolf Landauer, who was always really insistent that we should be really careful about adventurous logic. Rolf would always say, we come up with all sorts of fascinating ideas. They've got great potential. Are they always going to be working? Are we fooling ourselves in this space? And so on. So the quantum community, I think, has been extraordinarily careful not to hype it up. The researchers that work in the area, the companies, have always focused on, here's what we can do now. Here's what we're likely to be able to do fairly soon. Here's the opportunity space over there, but not to overpromise. So nobody says we're going to have a cryptographically relevant quantum computer tomorrow for you. They always say, decade away, may not even happen, because we've got to build fault tolerance. Okay, so this community has, I think, learned, and we've learned especially from Rolf Landauer, about how to be really careful about not overpromising and not be over-adventurous in this stuff. It is extraordinarily powerful, this area. but we've been careful.
Carmen, any final thoughts from you? Any brief final thoughts?
So we have spoken obviously about the pros and cons of each technology, but in this race, or in the question of will a winner take it all, there's other things that matter, like company stability, like company funding, and these aspects are affected by things like hype. And I would agree with Sir Peter that the community, people within the community, understand what a huge challenge it is to make a quantum computer. And in general, I think people within the community have been responsible in communicating this. So I think we have to be patient. It's going to take some time, but we should just enjoy the ride, because it's going to be very interesting as well.
Celia, over to you.
Well, I think that most people in the field think that it's not a question of if, but when. And that's a good question. For organizations that are potential users and beneficiaries of the technology, they need to be thinking about it now and paying attention and listening, just like with any area, to multiple sources of information, and not just relying on a single voice or perspective. That way you kind of, I think, get a picture that's more complete and accurate. So just sort of paying attention, and a larger company like a pharmaceutical company or another one that depends a lot on technology and computational power is advised to make some strategic investments and be ready, because it's not something that you can just get up to speed very quickly. It's not a matter of taking your current software programs and just putting them on a new quantum computer. There are new algorithms and new ways of using these systems that are being developed, and now is the time to start thinking about that.
Okay, and last but not least, Oliver, do you have any brief thoughts to finish?
I think one of the biggest things we can do to help avoid hype is, as Sir Peter Knight alluded to, is just being realistic about what we're going to accomplish in the next few years. That we personally try to do that through announcing our roadmap in advance, even though it maybe gives competitive advantage to some of our friends. And then the other thing is just get these tools into the hands of users so they can see for themselves and really understand what the state of development is. Because we really do not want to see quantum winter.
Well, on that note, thank you to our speakers so much for these fascinating insights. Professor Sir Peter Knight, Dr. Celia Merzbacher, Dr. Carmen Palacios Berraquero, and Dr. Oliver Dahl. Thank you all so much for your fascinating insights. Thank you to the audience as well for paying attention and being here with us and listening. Please do stay online and join us for the next session, which will be starting shortly.